Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Moms Like Me, powered by Support Now. Today, we have a unique guest with us, but someone who certainly fits the values and the mission of what we believe in at Support Now. So we're joined by our first male on the podcast. So not a mom, but a dad, a business leader, and really a trailblazer in the space of death and grief. So I would first like to welcome Justin Clifford from Bereave to the podcast. Justin, hello.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for this. I didn't quite realize I was the first male. It's a distinct honor, no doubt.
You're setting the bar, Justin, for all of our future male interviews. Yeah, you're setting the tone here. So we expect a lot of you today.
Well, it's a pretty high bar if you're talking to all these amazing moms. I don't know what I'll be able to contribute, but hopefully there's something out there.
Well, we are an inclusive company here, so we don't discriminate, although we tend to tell the stories of moms. Obviously, everyone has a point of view on major life moments, and I have been following the story of Bereave for a while at a super high level. For people that aren't familiar, Justin is leading a company that's helping businesses and employees navigate death and grief. But I'd first like for you to share a little bit more about what Bereave does and the mission behind it, so that people have a little bit more context going into this discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that. We help people navigate death and grief at work and at home. And it sounds super simple, but that actually takes a lot of different paths, mostly through our software platform, but also through some live training that we produce with some subject matter experts, every other month or so that we have for our customers. So a lot of it is education, but also there are tools and frameworks that can be used both at home for people who have suffered a loss, but also for HR leaders and managers of people who really need something to hold on to at the moment of impact when either they lose an employee or they have an employee come to them and say, "Hey, I've suffered a loss." The historical approach is pretty fragmented, and we're helping build a support system for those people at work.
Justin, I think that so many people love what you do, and I think people are naturally curious on why. Like, why this space? Of all the spaces to innovate in, why did you choose this? Was this a personal story? Was it something you observed? What's kind of the background on that?
Yeah, it's a personal story to two of the co-founders, not necessarily one of my stories. I've been touched by death and loss throughout my life, but Elijah and Matt suffered the loss of parents prematurely. And Elijah specifically lost both of his parents separately by the time he graduated college. He and Matt have been friends for years, and Matt lost his mom after Elijah lost his parents. But, through their friendship and through their grieving and through looking at the what I will refer to as the system of loss, really prevented both of them from a peaceful navigation of life and their own grief. And thinking through all of the things that got in their way, all the impediments, a lot of them are movable, changeable. That they are controllable to some degree. And it just takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of elbow grease, a lot of talking, right? A lot of loud talking coming out of the Bereave office. But really just putting the tools and the things in place to really help people have that peaceful navigation. But the story unfortunately revolves around loss of two of the co-founders.
For those that might not be familiar, can you give people a sense of how companies typically treat bereavement today? What's the baseline that most companies are operating off of?
Here's what typically happens, and we actually refer to it as random acts of bereavement support, because a manager finds out, they don't typically know what to do. So they go to HR, and HR typically, and again, these are generalizations, Jordan, typically gives that person, here's the policy. So here's what you are eligible for this loss. That policy usually says something about bloodlines and the relationship of the deceased to be able to say, here's how much time you get off of work. And then they might say, oh, also here's an 800 number to call. In some of the more advanced discussions that we've had, people send flowers or people go to the services, right, from the company. But the far end of the progressive companies are building support structures that are very similar to the support structures they've built for their employees in other areas of life, the much more celebratory times of life, things like giving birth or having a child or bringing a new child into your home, right? There are things like, for support systems for pets, right? Providing like pet insurance and pet adoption stipends and things like that. There's support systems for wellness, the hardship in life. Those are the areas that companies typically shy away from. They toe this line of, whether or not they should get involved. Most of our customers came to us and said, hey, listen, we know we don't do well here. We want to do better, but we also don't really know how. So can you help us? And we're not the only company that or the only people that could help them do this, right? They could hire consultants. There's a lot of different ways to slice it. But what they are trying to do is move away from decades of the same system, which was created as a leave policy in the 1970s, as far as my research goes, to attend a funeral, right? And that same system, 50 years later, is in place at most companies.
I often say, I believe, my assumption is that younger generations, we're better at talking about things that are uncomfortable. We're better talking about infertility and miscarriage. We're better talking about death than previous generations. And so it makes me wonder if some of the baseline that has been created with companies and corporations is somewhat reflective of the generations of people that were just building those companies that tend to be a little bit more reluctant to talk about loss. And I'm curious, why is it that way? What if companies, what if HR leaders said, to your point, people have done such a great job of embracing the happy moments. Why has it been so hard for people to look at loss through that same lens?
I'll answer the second part first. I think that is just reflective of society, right? Like, it is hard to talk about, especially in America. We don't tend to think about our own mortality, let alone talk about it. We might think about it in terms of like just being scared about it, or maybe buying life insurance, or maybe thinking about how we're going to leave some legacy behind, right? It's usually about a legacy, but it's not really about like, hey, what does my family do when I die? And what's going to happen for the next, not just 7 days, but 7 years, and how they go about their lives. Because hopefully they love me. And if they love me, they will grieve me. And unfortunately, that can take a variety of different types of physical and mental symptoms, can take quite a toll. But the other part of that is, I don't know, like, it's interesting hearing your take on like that assumption of who these people are. I think our customer base actually looks much different. It's almost flipped from the way you described it. Some of the more progressive companies on the celebratory moments, like, don't want to touch talking about death. They're not sure how to roll it out. They're not sure how to bring it up as a topic of conversation. I can give you some very specific profiles, which I'll stay away from today. But even like if I think about some of our customer base, a school district that's got 3 women running the HR team, that each of them have 30 years of experience. The family-owned, the 70-year-old family-owned company who's got 700 employees, right? We have this high-tech, high-progressive, high-benefits group population, customer population, but then we also have this other population that's been running businesses and departments for decades, literally decades, and they get it, right? So, and one of the hard parts of our job is actually trying to figure out as a startup who this profile is, because it's very, very different. And we made a lot of those assumptions early. Some of them were wrong. Some of them were close to right. But to your point, a lot of people, I think one of the more common factors is that people have experienced either their own loss or they've experienced supporting somebody close through loss, whether that's an employee, a friend, a relative. They've experienced being in that chair before. And that's really kind of the underlying component. There is one more little piece to that, which is people who are just honestly just compassionate people, and they understand. They are empathetic to the point where they can feel what other people are going through, or at least they can put themselves in those shoes. And when they do that, they just kind of realize like, whoa, like, that 800 number, that EAP that we provide with 3 free grief sessions or counseling sessions just doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
And those are the people that are saying like, hey, we need to do a better job.
Super interesting. And I also think that for HR leaders, until you're in a position where you experience a loss of an employee, and now your job is not just to support, your job isn't just to think about is supporting the employee from like a first degree loss. It's like to actually support internally how people are going to move forward. I think that's another really interesting angle to look at, because like death in all circumstances, we say, oh, it's never happened. It's so rare. But then when it happens, you can't be caught flat-footed, because employees are looking at their managers, they're looking at HR saying, well, what do we do now? So I'd imagine some of your customers, I'm curious, like, have they experienced the loss of an employee where now companies are really scrambling to provide the resources and support for existing employees so that they can have the emotional wherewithal to continue pressing on with their roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is going to sound inhumane what I'm about to say, but it's one of our primary sources of lead generation. We get calls on I would say a pretty frequent basis, especially from like smaller companies who might have like fractional HR, 50, 60, 70 employees that have said like, we lost an employee yesterday. We were given your number. We don't know what to do. Can you help? They weren't prepared. They weren't ready. And I'm not saying that's no knock on them. But it's that desire and willingness to think about employees' lives all the way through versus kind of stopping at a certain point, right? And I've got dozens of stories that I could share like that. And those come from all different types of companies, big, small. One of our customers came to us originally because they lost 2 employees. They're a 3,500 person company, 60 countries globally. They came to us because they lost 2 employees within like a 6-week period and had no idea what to do, right? And that's a company with, significant infrastructure. That happens. But also we have onboarded companies who have then called us and said, hey, we just lost an employee. We just used your platform. Can you, help do a couple of these like, things that might be helpful? Because that, and they were prepared, right? Like they had been through some of the training in our platform. They had built out a little bit of the structure that we helped them build out with the frameworks. It's not going to make it any easier to deal with, like, from an emotional perspective, from, the ripple effect that it can cause across an organization. Because you're not just talking about one person who has suffered a loss of an outside relative. You're talking about potentially dozens, hundreds of people, depending on that person, that could be impacted. And some of the smaller companies, they are like whole companies are now mourning and grieving and trying to figure out how to support each other. So these situations happen. And the interesting thing is, Jordan, you made a comment of like, people might think like, hey, it doesn't happen very often. What I don't think companies quite understand when you think about averages is that in the United States, 1 in 18 American workers, okay, people that are employed, 1 in 18 will suffer the loss of a sibling, spouse, child, or parent every year. Okay. So like, you can play the averages across your company. If you've got 1,000 employees, you can do the math and figure out how many people on average are likely to lose those 4 categories of people, which you could argue are potentially the closest and most significant losses. We know that's not exactly true, but let's call it that for now. And then when you think about the fact that 1 out of 2 of those people is going to leave their job within 12 months, now we're talking about significant blow to the P&L. We're talking about a business case, and a lot of business leaders are starting to realize the role that not just mental well-being, but just well-being in general plays in productivity, plays in their bottom line. And you're starting to see companies do the things like, provide mental health support, provide fertility treatment, provide menopausal support, right? Those things are starting to emerge because companies are really understanding the impact that it plays in their bottom line.
Yeah, and you kind of led me to kind of that next series of questions I had, which is what do companies stand to lose as a result of getting this wrong? And what you're alluding to is that they're beyond the emotional and mental toll that it can have on employees by not being prepared. There's also a very real retainment issue, or vulnerability that you might fall into, and it's expensive. It is simply expensive, and companies will still ultimately look at themselves as, how do we drive revenues and profits, and looking at it from a very black and white perspective. And what you're saying here is that the risk of not being prepared actually ends up being very financial detrimental to you if you're not careful.
Absolutely. And you think about what companies spend money on, right? From a retention perspective, or from, I will say, the perceived idea that some of these things do cause retention. There are companies spending hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars to provide a couple of meals a week to employees. It's pretty significant, and supporting somebody through a loss, it's not even close to that expensive. It requires some thoughtfulness. It requires some guts, and it requires you to pick up the phone and call us or consultants that are out there. I mean, hire an empathy coach, hire somebody to come in to give trauma-informed workplace training, put your managers through mental health CPR, right? There's a lot of things that you can go do to help start to build that support system. But ultimately, when you think about like the penny pinching that goes on in saying like, hey, you only get 3 days for this person, but if you want 5 days, it has to be this other person. And then it kind of stops, like, right? And they're not even thinking about the productivity that people come back grieving, right? We had a woman today talking in a thread on LinkedIn about crying at her desk for a month, right? Like, why is she there? She's not working. She's not getting anything done, right? Why do you have her in the office, right? But when you think about not just the retention piece and the frequency at which people leave within a year after a close loss, but productivity. I mean, think about people that have to close out, not even grief related, but like close out the life, if they are the executor of an estate or have responsibilities for the will or have to manage probate. It takes on average 1 hour a day for 15 months to close out somebody's life. And when you think about closing out somebody's life, think about credit cards, calling banks, calling, cable, like closing out all of these accounts, working through the courts. Like, when are those companies open? Probably during that person's working hours, right? So when are they doing this, right? So people are going to take time. They're going to take the time they need. They're going to find it in their unlimited PTO or their PTO policy. They're going to find it in sick days. They're going to find it somewhere. You might as well get credit for being a really compassionate workplace, and think about how to help those people back into productivity, like a productive state, versus just pushing them away and losing them 6, 7, 8 months later.
Which is tricky, I would imagine, though, because companies still want to know what's the ROI. So how do you know that a company is successful with Bereave? Like, how do you measure that, and how do you tell that story? Because, obviously I firmly believe in what you're doing, and I think anyone could. And it's so hard when it's not something that you're, quote, going to gain. You're not going to gain more, profits or top line necessarily. It's in prevention of something. So how do you all measure success for these companies, and what are some tips that you give to companies to say, this is how you know it's working?
Great question. And I don't have a great answer for you because we are so new that we haven't been able to, because of some of the limitations in our first, like the V1 of our product, we don't have a whole lot of data, right? We have what I will just refer to as feedback, right? And a lot of our customers say things like, we hope we don't ever need this. But if we do, we're going to be really, really grateful that we do. Companies that have come back to us and said, hey, didn't want to have to use this as much as we've had, but it has helped. Well, one of our customers came back and said, hey, you may be a better HR person today, because she had to support a teammate that had suffered the loss of, I believe it was a parent, probably 6 days after we onboarded. So like these little anecdotal things right now, in the future, being able to tie a lot of that activity back to very specific things is on the horizon here, probably in with our soft launch in January. But really, when you think about, we had a customer that said that he's the president of about a 150-person company, and he said, "Hey, if I can prevent one person from leaving." I mean, Jordan, he's paying $1,000, right? Like, our price point is so low that like ROI is not a conversation. But he said, if I can prevent one person leaving, it more than pays for itself 5, 6, 7, 8 times over, right?
Yeah.
When you think about replacement costs of people that leave, you're talking about 50% to 200% of an annual salary, right?
Yeah.
And investment in Bereave, and I can't speak to others, but investment in Bereave is significantly lower than that.
Yeah, I think again, great stories, and just a good framing for people that might be listening to say, like, how do I know how to show up? And I think one of the things that I believe so firmly, and I hear this from our customers, and I'm sure you've heard this through your years in building Bereave as well, which is that people remember how you show up in the hardest of times more than they do even in the best of times. And so it is a missed opportunity by companies to not be prepared for what you've properly articulated is the inevitable. Like, these things will happen. It's not an if. And companies can gain a lot by being prepared and putting their best foot forward, because it shows that employee that they really are there for them as the full person. And I always laugh, companies expect employees to show up and bring their full self to work. How often do we hit? We want you to bring your full self to work. And that also means that companies have to be prepared for what that full cycle of life looks like.
That's a great point. And I think to your point about people remember, it's not just, we have found it's not just the people that are impacted directly. It is that circle around that person that are watching. Like, those people are watching. How does the company show up in this moment? I've talked to 2 people in the last 10 days that have been at the center point of that, but told me about people, some of their best work friends that saw mistreatment and left because of that mistreatment. So they didn't just lose one employee. They lost a handful of employees because of that. Like, that trickles down to things like Glassdoor reviews. That trickles down to word of mouth. That trickles down to, you can go on Reddit and search bereavement. You can see some wild things on Reddit, but people do social posts all the time about their rejection of bereavement leave because, somebody's not married yet. It's their fiance that passed away, but you're not legally married, so you get no bereavement time, right? Like, you see those things unredacted live out there that can really, really hurt in the employer brand, at least to some degree. And you haven't even gotten into like litigation, right? Talking about things like different managers being given the basically the opportunity to determine what happens with each employee. And there's one manager that says, "Hey, we got you. Take the time you need. We built the systems in. We'll take care of your work. You take the time you need. We'll check in 14 days." Versus the manager that said, "Hey, the policy says 1 day, so I'll see you back tomorrow and prepare to hit your quota," right? That can happen at the same company. And that just, that type of inequity starts to open up litigation opportunity, right? That's like one end of the spectrum of like worst case scenario for everybody, right? But at the same time, like, thinking through that all the way, it is starting to emerge as an important piece to what you're describing. Like, if you're going to bring your whole self, you're going to bring the rough stuff too.
And I also want to touch back on something you said earlier, which is important, is like the people that are flocking to this just tend to be like very compassionate people. They want to do right. This is an opportunity for frontline managers to level up their leadership. It's not just about the X's and O's of the business. It's also about how to be a better leader and how to be more compassionate and empathetic in all these phases of life. And so it sounds like Bereave is really just providing more education and training for people that clearly have a desire to lead. And part of being a leader is being able to show up when things aren't as easy. And I think there's a lot of value. Companies invest a lot of money in leadership training, which is great. This is just another lens in which to look at that, because those are some really difficult times for frontline managers that are very uneasy on how to talk to people, what to say, what not to say, how to lean in, when to lean out. That's an invaluable education for people that are that are trying to climb a corporate ladder, but know that they're going to need to be, a champion of people along the way.
You've got a sales background, so this analogy might hit with you more than it might with another listener. It's not in the sales background, but anytime you start a sales enablement program for a new product or a new process or anything like that, it usually starts with why, right? There's some education on why this is important, right? Which is the reason we've included all of it that we have, and it's I'm not going to say it's the deepest, but it is a lot more than people get on a normal basis. So starting with why this is important, right? What are the implications to you, your team, your company? I mean, we haven't included it, but it could even be your income, right? Like there are implications to those managers' career paths and the way that they are perceived and all of those things that are typically pretty important to the success of a team. But we started with that because if there's just a baseline foundational, like 101 understanding of the impact, and it takes, 15, 30 minutes of your time just to understand what, what that baseline is. It can really, really change the way you show up with that understanding. And that can go a long way for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. And if nothing else, people move on from companies all the time, and they will remember the manager that showed up for them forever. And as you said earlier, people have no problem talking about legacy when it comes to loss. And so the easiest way to make sure that you're leaving a legacy and being memorable is making sure you're prepared for those times. Justin, as we wrap up, where can people find you, find more information, calls to action?
Yeah. Our website is bereave.io. You can find me, you can always email me at justin@bereave.io. And we are very visible on LinkedIn. You can just search me or search Bereave or whatever it is, but hopefully pretty easy to find.
Yes, Justin's become quite the thought leader in this space, but it's been incredible to watch the amount of engagement and people really, really flocking to this concept and making LinkedIn also reflect the realities of business. And, again, I called you a trailblazer earlier, and I mean that. And for those that don't know, Support Now is a part of the Bereave platform. We obviously share a mission and helping people, employees that are navigating death and grief. And we've been fortunate, frankly, to see a lot of our most successful registries be frontline managers. So we're seeing kind of the best of this in the sense that frontline managers that see a need for an employee that's experience a loss, and all the employees want to do something. And Support Now is right there to be a free tool platform to begin to mobilize everyone. So I am so excited about the future for Bereave and excited to grow alongside of you as we both venture to support millions of families that are going through these inevitable tough times. So thank you, Justin, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you for your work. It's great.
Of course.